Ladies and gentlemen, it's truly a great pleasure to be back to Reena. This is I don't know how many times I've been in Reena, but this is the second, I believe, AGM, Reena AGM I've been attending. It's always great pleasure to be back to Reena, and I want to acknowledge my colleague, David Cohen from Richmond Hill. Yes, David, and member of Reena board, and David and I worked together in Richmond Hill when he served as the Dean of the Council of Town of Richmond Hill for more than 20 years, and he was, of course, my councillor for a number of years. And I also want to acknowledge Sandy Kishan. I got to know Sandy a couple of years before I entered into politics, and we have worked together in various occasions, and I always admired her dedication to humanity. So thank you very much, Sandy, what you have done for our society, for our community, for our province of Ontario. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Reena's current board chairs, both foundation chair and the Reena chair, as well as the members of the board and the former members of the board, because this kind of organizations doesn't become on its own. There are people who make these organizations to become an institution as Reena is today. So thank you so much for your volunteer work. I'm sure, I know for the fact that you spend so much of your time and resources so that these institutions can become an institution where, once I said, Sandy again may recall this many years ago, there was a fundraising in Aurora. I spoke about Reena, and I said, the work you do in Reena is the God's work. You really do God's work, and thank you again for that wonderful work you do on behalf of all of us in this province. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit of my trip to Israel. I went to Israel twice, actually, so I have to go 3 times the next time. So there's a proverb say that if you visit Jerusalem 3 times, you tend to go every year, I guess. So I have to make that 3rd time to happen. But I was there last May 2016, and the May 2015. On May 2015, I was there on my own with a mission from the Ministry of Research and Innovation and the Ministry of Training Colleges, Universities. At that time, I was in charge of 2 ministries, so I was a double minister. So recently, I became only single minister. But and this time in 2015, I was there with Premier, where Premier led a very large delegation, about over 150-60 people, and Gary Gladstone was a member of that delegation. Both trips, missions were very, very successful. In 2015 mission, I renewed the agreement, the Science and Technology Agreement, which we had with Israel. Premier McGuinty signed this agreement when he was there, and we renewed this in 2015 and increased its funding to $3 million. And this year, we increased that funding when Premier was there to $5 million from our side and $5 million from Israeli side, as well as we established actually another joint technology and research and science collaboration work with Israeli partners called Magnet for $5 million from our side and $5 million from Israeli side. In 2 trips, I had the great pleasure of visiting 3 great institutions in Israel: Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv University, and Technion. These 2 universities, Technion and Hebrew University, they have been established about 100 years ago, close to 100 years ago. And this was actually many, many years ago, several decades before the State of Israel was formed. And those 2 institutions, they are great institutions, academic and research institutions around the world. And one of the things which I was told at Hebrew University was that cherry tomatoes was discovered and developed at Hebrew University. So whenever you take a cherry tomato, make sure that is invented in at Hebrew University. Of course, this is just one of the so many other contributions. Scientists and researchers and the professors at those very esteemed academic institutions, they have contributed to human knowledge and human civilization. I believe Technion has produced 4 Nobel Prize winners. And my hero, Albert Einstein, he was at Hebrew University at one point. So, so that was one of the visits, or part of our visits to Israel, visiting those 3 institutions. And we were there with CEOs and the presidents of our academic institutions and the research institutions. They have signed a number of research agreements between our scientists here, our researchers here, as well as researchers and scientists at those 3 institutions. And one of the very notable agreement was between the University Health Network here in Toronto and Technion University, or Israel Institute of Technology, to work on developing technologies to treat patients with cardiac problems. So that was an agreement with $75 million between 2 institutions, which will have a very, very significant impact on 7 billion human beings on this planet in the future. The other meetings we had in Israel was a meeting with chief scientists of Israel. I met Avi Hasson actually a few times in the States when he was there, as well as twice in Israel. And while we were there, we renewed our science and technology agreement with the State of Israel. And that was very, very interesting. Also, we had the opportunity to visit a number of research and technology institutions, those who have signed agreements with institutions in Canada. One of them was there is a company, actually one of the professors at Tel Aviv University developed a technology where they measure, without any invasive technology, to measure the dryness of eyes. Some people, they develop that disease where their eyes get dry, and if the eye gets dry, that is very, very painful. So with this new technology and a very inexpensive test, every doctor actually can buy this equipment and put it in his clinic or in her clinic and test the patient's eyes for dryness, and after that, of course, they can prescribe some medication. So they did test mine. Actually, I became the test tube there, or test, what they call it anyway. So they tested my eyes, and I passed the test. But this test is going to be further developed by a Canadian and Ontario company here in Mississauga, actually. One of the highlights of our visit to Israel, actually, this time and last time when I was there, was visiting Yad Vashem. That is, I'm sure some of you, or maybe many of you, they have visited Yad Vashem, and that is a very, very moving when you visit that museum, and as well as when you read on behalf of the people of Ontario at the museum. And we spent about, I think, half a day there, and it was very educational and extremely moving. The other highlight of our visit to Israel in this trip was a meeting between Premier and former President and former Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. I didn't have a chance to meet him at that visit, because at the time when Premier was meeting him, I had to speak at a conference in Tel Aviv. But I had the opportunity to see him, though from far distance, when he was here in Toronto recently with Dr. Henry Kissinger. So that was one very exciting meeting, which Premier really appreciated the meeting. And I had the chance to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with Premier Wynne and Dr. Hoskins, Minister Hoskins. The other highlights of our visit was a roundtable at Haifa, where CERDEF, which is the Canada-Israel Industrial Research and Development Foundation, which is a Canadian institution, organized a roundtable with Arab-Israeli innovators and inventors in Haifa. So that was also another meetings we had in Israel. We had 5 days in Israel, but every half an hour we had meetings at various places with various people. Premier had the opportunity to address the business community of Israel in Tel Aviv, where she talked about Ontario's economy and the fact that Ontario is #1 jurisdiction in Americas for foreign direct investments, and the fact that Ontario is one of the top 3 jurisdictions in Americas when it comes to life sciences, as well as Ontario is #1 jurisdiction in Americas for ICT, information communication technology sector. And as a result of those conversations, I think the Israeli businesses and industries and the research communities, they got excited to collaborate with Ontario institutions and organizations. One of the interesting MOUs which was signed was between BlackBerry and also an Israeli company to work on cybersecurity. As you know, cybersecurity has become and will become a very major issue for individuals and indeed for governments as well as for institutions. So I think that is also going to open up a big business for in the area of cybersecurity for Ontario as well as Israeli companies in the future. But the most highlights of that trip was the Shabbat dinner at the King David Hotel. In our last evening in Israel, one of the Toronto organizations, actually it's called Center for Israel and the Jewish Affairs of Ontario, they hosted actually a Shabbat dinner and for the whole delegation at King David Hotel. That was just fantastic. So I look forward for my next trip to Israel, and if you haven't been in Israel, I highly recommend you to visit Israel. And if you are visiting Jerusalem, I highly recommend you read a couple of books before visiting Israel and before visiting Jerusalem. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Toda Rabba.